A woman worth $400 million called a stranger from a hardware store parking lot and asked him to pretend to love her for one night. She did not know he already loved what she stood for. She only knew her date had canceled 2 hours before the biggest charity auction of the year, and she could not walk in alone, not with the board watching, not with the vultures circling. What she did not know yet was that the man she was about to hire was the reason her charity still existed at all. If you enjoy stories where pride gets humbled and quiet men turn out to be the strongest ones in the room, press subscribe now so you do not miss how this one ends. Vivian Marsh stood in the marble lobby of her own building at 6:15 in the evening, phone pressed to her ear, and listened to her assistant apologize for the 3rd time in 90 seconds. Her date, a hedge fund manager named Preston, who she had never much cared for anyway, had called off, with some excuse about a family emergency that Vivian suspected was really a golf trip in Scottsdale. It did not matter why. It only mattered that in 90 minutes she was expected at the Larchmont Children's Foundation Gala, the same gala her late father had founded, the same gala where she sat on the board and had chaired the fundraising committee for the last 6 years, and she could not arrive without an escort. Not tonight, not with Desmond Cole and his wife, already seated at table 2, waiting for any crack in her composure they could widen into a headline. She had built Marsh Industries into something her father never dreamed it could be, had done it by never once looking like she needed anyone, and she was not about to let one canceled date be the thing that finally made her look human in front of people who fed on weakness. So when her assistant, a nervous young woman named Priya, suggested the name of a contractor who had done work on Vivian's lake house that spring, Vivian almost laughed out loud in the lobby. "He fixes docks," Priya said, "but he's presentable, and he's not going to sell the story to anyone. He needs the money too badly to risk it, and he's got that look, that quiet look people don't argue with." Vivian did not have another option. She told Priya to get her the number. Ryan Hollis was elbow-deep in a leaking pipe under his kitchen sink when his phone rang with a number he did not recognize, and he almost let it go to voicemail because his daughter Maddie was doing homework at the table 6 feet away, and he did not like being on the phone when she needed help with fractions. But something made him answer, some old instinct that had never fully gone quiet even 4 years after he walked away from the life that instinct used to serve. The voice on the other end was crisp, fast, and entirely unapologetic, and it took him a full 10 seconds to understand that Vivian Marsh, the Vivian Marsh, was asking him to put on a tuxedo and be her date at a black tie gala in 90 minutes for $2,000. He almost said no. He had said no to stranger things in his life and regretted it less. But $2,000 was Maddie's spring tuition at the good school, the one with the small classes and the patient teachers, the one he had been scraping toward for months. And there was something else, too, something he did not examine too closely. In that moment, a small curiosity about the woman whose name was stitched into the corner of every donation report he had quietly filed for 5 years without her ever knowing his. "I need someone who can wear a jacket and not embarrass me," Vivian said, as if she were describing a job requirement on a hiring sheet. "Can you do that?" "I can do that," Ryan said. "Good," she said. "A car will be at your address in 40 minutes. She hung up before he could ask a single question, which was, he would later think, entirely in character for a woman he did not yet know, but would come to understand better than almost anyone in his life. He found Maddie's babysitter, a retired teacher 2 doors down named Loretta, who had watched Maddie since she was in diapers, and he dug the one good suit he owned out of the back of his closet, the one from his wedding, still fitting close enough after 4 years of manual labor had kept him lean. Maddie watched him knot his tie in the bathroom mirror with the serious focus of an 8-year-old cataloging something important. "Are you going on a date, Daddy?" she asked. "Sort of," Ryan said. "It's pretend." Maddie considered this with the gravity children reserved for things adults think are simple. "Pretend dates are still dates," she said. "You have to be nice." "I'm always nice," Ryan said, and Maddie rolled her eyes in a way that told him she had heard that line before and did not entirely believe it applied to fancy parties with fancy people. The car arrived on time, black and silent, and Ryan sat in the back feeling the collar of his shirt too tight against his neck. Feeling the old muscle memory of rooms like the one he was about to enter rise up in him uninvited. He had not worn a tuxedo in 4 years. He had not walked into a room full of powerful people who assumed things about him based on his clothes. Since the night everything in his old life ended, he told himself this was different. This was $2,000 and one evening and nothing more. Vivian was waiting in the hotel's private entrance when the car pulled up, dressed in deep emerald silk that made her look, Ryan thought before he could stop himself, like something out of an old film, poised and untouchable, and slightly too still, like a woman holding her own posture together through sheer will. She looked him over once quickly, the way she might inspect a contractor's estimate for hidden costs, and something in her expression shifted just slightly. Surprise she did not bother to hide well. "You clean up," she said, which from her, Ryan would learn was practically a love letter. "Thank you," he said. "You look like you're bracing for a fight." She looked at him sharply. "I am," she said. "You'll want to keep up." Inside, the ballroom of the Wentworth Hotel glittered with the particular expensive hush of old money, trying not to look like it was showing off, though of course it was. Chandeliers threw soft gold light over round tables dressed in white linen, and a quartet played something classical and forgettable in the corner, while waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne that cost more per glass than Ryan made in an hour of dock repair. He felt eyes on him the moment he walked in beside Vivian, felt the room doing its silent arithmetic, trying to place him, trying to decide if he was somebody or nobody, and he understood in that instant exactly why she needed him to look like he belonged. "Smile like you like me," Vivian murmured under her breath as they crossed the room, "and for God's sake, don't let go of my arm, unless I let go first." Ryan almost laughed. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly, and felt her arm tense against his, in something that might have been the beginning of amusement. They were seated at table 2, close enough to the stage that Ryan could see every flicker of expression on the faces around them, and it was there he first noticed the man who would later try to burn Vivian's world down. Desmond Cole sat 2 seats over, silver-haired, tanned in the artificial way of men who vacationed on schedule rather than instinct, wearing the kind of smile that never once reached his eyes. He was Vivian's cousin and the company's chief operating officer, and from the first 30 seconds of watching him watch her, Ryan understood that Desmond Cole did not like Vivian Marsh. Not really. And had perhaps never liked her, not since the day her father passed the company to her instead of to him. "Vivian, darling," Desmond said, leaning across his wife to address her, his eyes flicking to Ryan with an appraisal so cold it was almost professional. "And who is this?" "Ryan Hollis," Vivian said smoothly, sliding her hand over Ryan's on the table, in a gesture so natural it startled him. "He does restoration work. Waterfront properties, mostly." "Restoration work," Desmond repeated, letting the words sit in his mouth like something slightly sour. "How charming. And here I thought Preston was joining you tonight." "Preston had a family emergency," Vivian said, her voice flat and final, the tone of a woman closing a door. Desmond smiled wider, and Ryan recognized the smile, had seen its cousins in boardrooms and briefing rooms years ago. The smile of a man storing away information he intended to use later. "How fortunate you had someone to step in," Desmond said. "Must be quite convenient, having a handyman on call." Ryan felt the old anger rise in him, quick and clean, the kind he had trained for years ago to control and redirect, and instead of taking the bait, he simply smiled and said, "Convenience, one word for it. Vivian's a good client. She pays on time. Which is more than I can say for half the waterfront properties in this county." There was a small silence, and then, unexpectedly, laughter. A genuine ripple of it from the older woman seated beside Desmond's wife. And Ryan watched Vivian's mouth twitch at the corner in something that was almost a real smile. Later, during the auction itself, Vivian excused herself to speak with the foundation's program director about the evening's final numbers, and Ryan found himself alone at the table with a glass of water he had been nursing all night. Watching the paddles rise and fall for vacation packages and signed sports, memorabilia, and weekend stays at vineyards he would never in his life afford. It was during the seventh item, a modest painting donated by a local artist, that the director took the microphone and made an announcement that stopped Brian's water halfway to his mouth. "Before we continue," she said, "I want to take a moment to recognize a very special supporter of the Larchmont Children's Foundation, someone who has given more to this organization over the last 5 years than almost anyone in this room, and who has done so entirely anonymously, asking for nothing in return. We know him only as a donor who signs his contributions with the initials R and H, and tonight, for the first time, we'd like to publicly thank whoever that generous soul might be." Ryan's stomach dropped straight through the floor. He kept his eyes on his glass, on the condensation sliding down its side, and prayed the moment would pass the way most moments passed, unremarked and forgotten. But Vivian was walking back toward the table just then, and she stopped mid-step, staring at the director, something working behind her eyes, some calculation clicking into place with visible force. She sat back down slowly. "R and H," she said quietly. Not quite to him, not quite to herself. "Ryan Hollis." Ryan did not answer right away. He had spent 5 years being careful, sending the contributions through a private accountant, keeping his name off every list, every plaque, every thank you letter, because the money had never been about being seen. It had been about the only thing he had left of the life he used to live, a way of putting something good back into the world. Using the wreckage of what that life had cost him. "It's not a big deal," he finally said. Vivian turned to look at him fully now, and there was something in her face he had not seen there before, something unguarded. "Do you have any idea," she said, her voice low so only he could hear it, "how many board meetings I have sat in, wondering who was keeping our emergency medical fund solvent when the big donors pulled back during the recession? Do you have any idea how many times I asked our director to find this person so I could thank them properly, and she told me they didn't want to be found?" "I didn't want to be found," Ryan said simply. "I still don't, particularly." "Why not?" she asked. "Because it was never about credit," he said. "It was about a promise I made to someone." He did not elaborate, and something in his tone told Vivian not to push. Not yet, though the question sat between them for the rest of the evening like a held breath. It was near the end of the night, after the final gavel had come down on the last auction item and the band had shifted into something slower, that Desmond Cole approached their table one more time, his wife trailing behind him with the tired patience of a woman who had learned long ago not to interfere with her husband's games. "Quite the mystery man you've brought us," Desmond said to Vivian, though his eyes stayed on Ryan. "Anonymous donor, handyman, and now, apparently, your date. People might start to wonder what else you're hiding, Vivian." Ryan felt the words land, felt the old protective instinct flare up in his chest, and before he could think better of it, he said lightly, trying to diffuse it the way he might diffuse any room that had gone tense without warning, "People might think we're actually together." He meant it as a joke, a small release valve, a way of laughing off Desmond's insinuation before it could take root. But Vivian did not laugh. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. Really looked at him, and the whole table seemed to lean in without moving, and she said, quiet enough that only Ryan and Desmond could hear it, "Would that be so bad?" The table fell silent. Desmond's smile faltered for the first time all evening, some smug certainty draining out of his face, replaced by something sharper and more calculating. Vivian's wife glanced between them with open curiosity, and Ryan sat very still, feeling the weight of 4 words, land, somewhere he had not let anyone reach in a very long time. He did not answer right away. He simply reached over, under the table, and found her hand and held it, and said nothing at all because some things did not need an answer, only an acknowledgement. The drive home that night was quiet. Vivian sat with her head against the window watching the city lights slide past, thinking about a version of herself from 5 years ago who had built a wall so thick around her heart that she had genuinely forgotten there was a heart behind it at all. A woman who measured every relationship in terms of what it could cost her and what it could gain her, and who had apparently been quietly saved by a stranger's generosity for half a decade without ever once suspecting it. "You never told me why," she said finally, as the car slowed near his house. "Why you give the money?" Why, you don't want anyone to know. Ryan looked out at his small house at the porch light Loretta had left on for him, and after a moment he said, "My wife died 5 years ago. Complications after our daughter was born. I was going to be a doctor, Vivian. I was 2 years from finishing a surgical residency at a hospital 2 hours from here, and I was good at it, better than good, and none of it mattered the night she needed me and I couldn't save her myself, and no one else could either. I walked away from medicine because I could not walk back into a hospital and pretend the worst day of my life hadn't happened there. I started doing dock repair because it was quiet and it let me be home for my daughter every night, and it never asked anything of me that I couldn't give. The donations go to the children's fund because I couldn't save my wife, but maybe I can help save someone else's." Vivian did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "I'm sorry. And thank you. Both of those things are true." Ryan nodded, and something passed between them in the dark of the car, something neither of them had words for yet. And when he got out, he leaned back in for just a second and said, "Keep that answer in mind. The one from tonight. I meant to ask you to explain it, but I think I'd rather you just kept meaning it." He shut the door before she could respond, and Vivian sat in the car, long after it pulled away from the curb, replaying his words like a puzzle she did not yet have all the pieces to. The weeks that followed brought Ryan back into Vivian's orbit more than either of them planned. She found reasons, professional reasons she told herself, to call him about the Foundation's small maintenance projects, about a dock at the summer camp the charity ran that needed repair before the season started, and each time he showed up in his battered truck with his tool belt slung over one shoulder. She found herself lingering nearby longer than necessary, watching him work with the same quiet, exact competence he had shown in the ballroom, just translated into wood and rope and steel, instead of conversation. It was on one of those afternoons at the summer camp's lakefront that Vivian met Maddie for the first time. The little girl had come along because school was out for a teacher workday, and she sat on the dock's edge with her father's old level in her lap, watching him work with an attentiveness that made Vivian's chest ache in a way she did not examine too closely. "You're the lady from the party," Maddie said, looking up at Vivian with the frank, unfiltered gaze of a child sizing up a stranger. "Daddy said, you're his boss now." "I'm not exactly his boss," Vivian said, crouching down to Maddie's level. An instinct she did not know she had until it arrived fully formed. "I just ask him to fix things sometimes." Maddie nodded seriously. "He fixes lots of things," she said. "He fixed our sink and our porch step and Mrs. Loretta's fence. He's really good at fixing things that are broken, even people things, I think, though he doesn't say that part out loud." Vivian glanced up at Ryan, who was pretending very hard to be absorbed in a support beam, his ears faintly red. "What kind of people things?" she asked Maddie. Maddie shrugged with the casual wisdom of the very young. "Like sad things," she said. "He was really sad before. Now he's less sad. I think it's because of you, actually. He hums now." "He didn't used to hum." Ryan cleared his throat loudly. "Maddie, sweetheart, why don't you go see if Miss Priya brought snacks in the car?" Maddie skipped off obediently, and Ryan finally looked at Vivian, something sheepish and unguarded in his expression. "Kids," he said. "They don't know when to keep quiet." "It's all right," Vivian said, and found that she meant it more than she expected to. It was not long after that Desmond Cole's campaign began, in earnest, subtle at first and then less so. Vivian started hearing whispers from board members about her judgment about whether her attention was properly focused on the company during a critical merger negotiation with a shipping conglomerate, about whether her public appearance with, as one board member delicately put it, an unconventional companion, was appropriate given Marsh Industries' image. Desmond fed these whispers carefully, always appearing concerned rather than malicious, always framing his comments as loyalty to the company rather than personal ambition, though Vivian knew her cousin well enough to recognize old hunger dressed up as new virtue. It came to a head 3 weeks later in a boardroom meeting that Vivian had expected to be routine and that instead became an ambush. Desmond stood before the assembled board with a folder of documents and a face arranged into practiced sorrow, and announced that he had concerns, serious concerns, about irregularities in the shipping merger numbers, irregularities he suggested, without quite saying it outright, might trace back to Vivian's distracted leadership. "I don't say this lightly," Desmond told the room, his voice heavy with false reluctance, "but I think we all know Vivian's judgment has been compromised lately by personal matters. This handyman she's been seen with everywhere, this sudden charity project at the summer camp, using company resources no less, it raises questions about priorities." Vivian felt the old fear rise in her, the fear that had driven her every professional decision since she took over the company from her father. The fear of being seen as weak, as distracted, as a woman who could not hold her own empire together. But underneath that fear, something steadier had grown in the past few weeks. Something Ryan's quiet, unbothered integrity had planted in her without either of them quite noticing. "Show me the irregularities," she said calmly. Desmond hesitated just slightly, just long enough for Vivian to notice. "It's complex," he said. "Financial engineering, mostly. Hard to explain to a board that isn't versed in the shipping industry's more technical contracts." "Try me," Vivian said. "Or better yet, since you seem so certain there's fraud buried in these numbers, let's bring in an independent set of eyes, someone with no stake in the outcome either way." "That," Desmond said, smiling thinly, "seems like an unnecessary delay." It was Vivian's longtime accountant, a soft-spoken woman named Eleanor Voss, who had kept the company's books for nearly 30 years and had known Vivian since she was a child, following her father through the halls of the family business, who came to Vivian's office 2 days later, with a look on her face that told Vivian something serious had been found. "I've been going through the merger contracts," Desmond flagged, Eleanor said, laying a stack of papers on Vivian's desk. "And there are irregularities, Vivian, but they're not from your side. They're modifications made after the fact, to shipping manifests and cost projections, and they all route back through an account Desmond controls personally. I think he's been quietly siphoning margin off this merger for months and building a paper trail that would make it look like your negligence." When it finally surfaced, Vivian sat very still, absorbing this, feeling something cold and clarifying settle into her chest. "Can you prove it?" she asked. "I can show the money moved," Eleanor said. "But the how of it, the technical side, the actual manipulation of the shipping data itself, that's beyond what I can testify to, convincingly. We'd need someone who understands maritime logistics and structural engineering both, someone who can look at those manifests and explain exactly how the numbers were altered without it being obvious to an untrained eye." It was Ryan. 3 days before the emergency board meeting Desmond had forced onto the calendar to formally move for a vote of no confidence in Vivian's leadership, who Vivian called at nearly 11 at night, her voice tight with something between fear and desperate hope. "I need to ask you something. And it's going to sound strange," she said, when he answered. "Ask," Ryan said. "Maddie's asleep. I've got time." "You worked in medicine before," Vivian said. "But before that, before your residency, you told me once you studied structural engineering, naval architecture, wasn't it, before you switched to pre-med." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "That was a long time ago," he said carefully. "I need someone who understands cargo weight, distribution, whole load calculations, shipping, manifest fraud," Vivian said. "I need someone who can look at falsified data and tell me exactly how it was falsified in language a board of very frightened, very rich people can understand in one sitting. Desmond thinks I don't have anyone who can do that. I think I might." There was a long pause on the line, and then Ryan said quietly, "Send me everything you have. I'll look at it tonight." He worked at his kitchen table until 3 in the morning, papers spread out under the same light, where he used to help Maddie with her homework, old knowledge surfacing in him, like something long dormant finally allowed to breathe. He found the discrepancy within 2 hours, a pattern of manifest weights that did not match fuel consumption records, cargo insurance valuations, quietly padded, and then walked back down before final filing. A scheme, elegant enough that it would have taken someone with very specific technical knowledge to catch it at all. By the time the sun came up, he had built a case laid out in plain, clear language, the kind of clarity he used to bring to explaining a diagnosis to a frightened family. And he had traced every falsified number back to the same private account Eleanor had already flagged. The board meeting was held in the glass-walled conference room on the top floor of Marsh Industries. 12 board members seated around a long table with Desmond at the head, visibly relishing his moment, and Vivian seated at the opposite end, her spine straight, her face unreadable. Ryan sat beside her, in a plain button-down shirt with his sleeves rolled to the elbow. No tuxedo this time. Nothing to hide behind, just himself. Desmond opened with a prepared statement about fiduciary responsibility and declining shareholder confidence, and when he finished, he turned to Vivian with theatrical gentleness and said, "I don't relish this, Vivian, truly. But the board deserves transparency, and I think it's time we discussed whether your personal distractions have compromised this company's financial integrity." Vivian did not raise her voice. "Before we discuss my personal life," she said, "I'd like the board to hear from someone about the merger numbers you've been so concerned with. Desmond, Ryan, if you would." Ryan stood, and for a moment the old boardroom instinct, the one he thought he had buried 4 years ago, rose up cleanly inside him, steady and sure. He walked the board through the shipping manifests, page by page, explaining in plain terms how cargo weights had been altered after initial filing, how insurance valuations had been inflated, and then quietly corrected in a second, unpublished revision. How every one of those revisions traced back through 3 shell accounts to a personal holding, controlled by Desmond Cole. He did not raise his voice either. He simply laid out the truth, the way he used to lay out a diagnosis clearly, without embellishment, letting the facts do the work that emotion could not. "This is absurd," Desmond said, his voice rising, his composure cracking for the first time. "This man is a handyman. He fixes docks. What authority does he have to make these accusations? I have a degree in naval architecture from a program that trains people to build and inspect the very ships whose manifests you falsified," Ryan said calmly. "And an accounting record that Eleanor Voss can independently confirm shows the money moving into your account within 72 hours of each manifest revision. I'm not asking the board to trust my authority, Mr. Cole. I'm asking them to trust the numbers." The room was silent. Desmond looked to the other board members for support and found none waiting for him. Found instead the particular terrible silence of people recalculating who they believed. Vivian stood then and looked at her cousin with a steadiness that had cost her a great deal to find. "I built this company's reputation on trust," she said. "My father built it before me on the same thing. You tried to use my personal life as a smokescreen for your own theft, Desmond, and you nearly succeeded because you assumed no one in this room would look past a man's job title to see his actual worth. I will not make that mistake again. I move that the board terminate Desmond Cole's position effective immediately and refer this matter to outside counsel for prosecution." The vote was unanimous, Desmond's own allies abandoning him with the swift, self-preserving speed of people who had only ever been loyal to power, not to him. He was escorted from the building within the hour, his career and his reputation collapsing in the same afternoon he had planned to watch Vivian's collapse instead. In the weeks after, the company's board, chastened and grateful, offered Ryan a permanent consulting position, overseeing structural and logistics integrity for all of Marsh Industries' shipping contracts, a role with a salary that would have seemed impossible to him 4 years earlier, standing in a hospital hallway with nothing left to give. He accepted, but only after negotiating terms that would have made his old ambitious younger self laugh. Terms that guaranteed he would never work later than 5 in the evening, that he could work remotely twice a week, that no meeting would ever be scheduled during Maddie's school pickup. Vivian agreed to every condition without argument and told the board plainly that a company that could not accommodate a good father raising his daughter well did not deserve his talent in the first place, a policy she began applying, quietly but firmly, across the entire organization in the months that followed. 6 months after the gala, Vivian stood on the porch of Ryan's small house on a Saturday evening in early autumn, watching him grill something on an old, slightly rusted barbecue, while Maddie chased fireflies across the yard in bare feet, her laughter carrying clean and bright through the cooling air. Vivian was not dressed in silk. She wore jeans and one of Ryan's old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up over her wrists, and she held a glass of lemonade instead of champagne, and she thought, watching him, that she had never in her life felt less like she needed to prove anything to anyone in the room. He glanced up and caught her watching him, and something easy passed between them, something that no longer needed words to carry its full weight. "You're still funding the foundation," she said, walking over to stand beside him. "Every month," he said, "though I suppose it's not much of a secret anymore, since you insisted on putting my name on that plaque." "You earned the plaque," Vivian said. "You earned a lot more than a plaque, but you wouldn't let me give you more than that." Ryan set down his tongs and looked at her properly, the grill smoke curling up between them. "Do you remember what you said to me?" he asked. "At that first gala, when I made that joke about people thinking we were together." "I remember," Vivian said quietly. "I've thought about it a lot," he said, wondering if you meant it or if it was just a good line to shut Desmond up. "Tra!" Vivian reached over and took his hand, the same way she had under that table 6 months ago, except now there was nothing pretend about it, nothing performed for an audience, just the honest weight of her fingers closing around his. "I meant it," she said. "I think some part of me knew, even then, that you were the only person in that entire room who wasn't after something from me." Maddie came running up the porch steps just then, breathless and glowing, and looked between them with the same clear-eyed perceptiveness she had shown from the very beginning. "Are you guys finally not pretending anymore?" she asked, entirely without embarrassment, the way only a child could ask something so enormous, so lightly. Ryan looked at Vivian, and Vivian looked back at him, and neither of them answered right away, because the answer was already written plainly enough on both their faces that words felt almost unnecessary. Finally, Ryan crouched down to Maddie's height and said, "No, sweetheart, we're not pretending anymore." Maddie nodded, satisfied, as if this were simply the confirmation of something she had known all along, and ran back down into the yard to chase the last of the evening's fireflies, leaving the two adults standing together on the porch in a silence that held no gossip, no calculation, no fear of being seen, only the quiet, ordinary beginning of something neither of them had expected to find, but both had, in their own guarded ways, been hoping for all along. What began as a favor bought for $2,000 became the truest partnership either of them had ever known, not because a title changed or a company was saved, though both of those things happened, but because two people who had each built their own separate walls out of loss and duty finally let someone else see what those walls had been protecting. Vivian Marsh learned that the strongest thing she ever did as a leader was to trust a man everyone else had underestimated. Ryan Hollis learned that healing did not mean forgetting what he had lost, only making room, finally, for what he might still be given. And somewhere, in a modest house with a porch light, always left on, a little girl, who once asked her father to be nice on a pretend date, got to watch every single day after, exactly what it looked like when the pretending finally stopped and something real took its place.